The roaring engine of a sleek motorcycle shattered the peaceful silence of the countryside as a biker sped down a dusty road. Dressed in leather with an air of arrogance, he barely noticed the old man working in the fields. Sweat dripped from the farmer's brow as he tended to his crops, his hands rough from years of hard labor. The biker sneered, slowing down just enough to throw an insult his way. "Must be tough living like this," he scoffed. "Bet you've never done anything exciting in your life." The farmer paused, straightened his back, and wiped his hands on his worn-out jeans. He didn't react with anger. Instead, he gave the biker a calm, knowing look, one that hinted at a past far greater than the young man could imagine. But the biker wasn't interested in old stories. With a smirk, he revved his engine and rode off, leaving behind a cloud of dust and a man who had seen more battles than he would ever know. What the biker didn't realize was that the quiet farmer he had just insulted wasn't just any man. He was a decorated war hero, a soldier who had once fought in battles so intense most wouldn't have survived. And soon, the biker would find out the hard way that appearances can be deceiving. The biker chuckles to himself, shaking his head as he revs his engine once more. The farmer, unfazed by the taunts, wipes the sweat from his brow and continues his work. He's heard worse before, much worse. But the biker isn't content with just words. He leans forward on his bike, circling the farmer's truck like a predator sizing up its prey. "Bet you've never even left this town, huh?" he sneers. "Probably been stuck on this land your whole life, dreaming about what it'd be like to be someone else." The farmer finally looks up, his gaze steady and unreadable. There's a flicker of something in his eyes, something the biker doesn't recognize: calm, unwavering, and utterly unshaken. "This land's been good to me," the farmer says simply. "Better than you'd understand." The biker scoffs. Yeah? What's so great about breaking your back every day for pennies?" He pulls off his sunglasses and leans in. "You ever thought about doing something that actually matters?" There's a long silence. The farmer doesn't answer right away. Instead, he adjusts the strap of his gloves, dusts off his pants, and takes a slow step forward. For the first time, the biker notices the way he moves, not like a tired old man, but with a quiet strength, as if he's used to carrying more than just sacks of grain. "You think your life's the only one that matters?" the farmer finally says, his voice calm but firm. "You don't know the first thing about me." The biker laughs, but there's a forced edge to it now. "Oh yeah? And what's there to know?" The farmer exhales, staring out at the endless stretch of farmland. His fingers tighten slightly around his work gloves, but he doesn't lash out. Instead, he lets the past wash over him, if only for a moment. A truck rumbles by on the dirt road, kicking up dust. The biker watches it go, growing impatient. "Look, old man, I don't have all day," he says, rolling his eyes. "I was just trying to help you realize how much of life you're missing. But hey, if you're happy with this little patch of dirt, who am I to stop you?" The farmer doesn't flinch. He simply studies the biker for a long moment, as if seeing straight through him. "You ever been in a fight, son?" The biker smirks. "Yeah, a couple bar fights." "Nothing serious, though." "Why?" The farmer nods, almost to himself. "Figured." Something in the air shifts. The biker, despite himself, suddenly feels uneasy. He tries to shake it off, but the silence between them grows heavier. "You think strength is about how fast your bike goes?" the farmer says after a pause. "Or how loud you can be. But real strength isn't in the noise." His voice lowers slightly. "It's in what you can endure." The biker crosses his arms. "And I suppose you're some kind of expert on that?" The farmer exhales again, but this time, there's something else in his expression. Not frustration. Not anger. Just something deeper. Something earned. "I was 19 when I was sent overseas," the farmer finally says, his voice quieter now. "Didn't know the first thing about war, about survival. I just knew I had to do my part." The biker blinks. He hadn't expected that. "You were in the military." The farmer doesn't answer right away. Instead, he looks down at his hands that have held more than just farm tools. Hands that have gripped rifles, bandaged wounds, carried brothers in arms through fire and smoke. Some of us don't get to choose an easy life, he says at last. Some of us do what needs to be done no matter the cost. For the first time, the biker doesn't have a quick remark. Something about the way the farmer speaks, the way he carries himself, it doesn't fit the picture of the frail, insignificant man he had in his head. You're lying, the biker finally says, but there's no confidence behind it. You're just messing with me. The farmer meets his gaze. Am I? The biker wants to shake it off, wants to roll his eyes and drive away. But then, as if fate itself wants to drive the truth home, a truck slows down as it passes. An older man in the passenger seat leans out, tipping his hat toward the farmer. Good to see you, Captain, the man calls out before the truck rolls on. The biker stiffens. Captain? His stomach twists slightly as he turns back to the farmer, who simply watches him, waiting to see how he'll react. The biker swallows. What? What? What kind of captain? The farmer tilts his head slightly. You seem smart, he says. You figure it out. The biker's mind races. His father used to tell him stories about soldiers, real soldiers, men who had seen things no one should ever have to see. Captains weren't just officers. They were the kind of men who led others into battle, the kind who made decisions most people wouldn't be able to live with. And suddenly, the biker isn't so sure about the man standing in front of him. He doesn't look at him the same way anymore. There's a weight to the farmer's words, an undeniable truth in his presence that the biker can't ignore. And for the first time, he wonders if maybe, just maybe, he's been wrong. Very wrong. But he isn't ready to admit that yet. So instead, he forces a smirk, though it doesn't come as easily this time. All right, Captain, he says, trying to sound casual. Let's say I believe you. What does that change? The farmer studies him for another long moment, then shakes his head with a small smile. That's for you to figure out, he says simply. And with that, he turns back to his work, leaving the biker standing there silent, unsettled, and more uncertain than he's ever been in his life. The biker stood frozen, watching the old farmer as he turned back to his work, lifting a bale of hay onto the back of his truck with ease. The man barely seemed fazed by their conversation, but for the biker, everything had shifted. The confidence he had ridden in with, the smugness in his words, it was all gone now, replaced with something he wasn't used to feeling. Doubt. For years, he had built his identity on the idea that strength came from rebellion, from living fast and never looking back. He had mocked people who spent their lives in one place, assuming they were too weak or afraid to reach for more. But standing in front of this man, this supposed nobody who had seen war, led others into battle, and survived things the biker couldn't even imagine, he started to question everything he thought he knew. The engine of his motorcycle idled beneath him, the familiar rumble now feeling oddly distant. He could just leave. Act like none of this mattered, like he didn't care. But something about the way the farmer had looked at him, the way he carried himself with a quiet strength, made it impossible to turn away so easily. A light breeze rustled the dry grass, and the biker shifted uncomfortably. So what exactly did you do? He asked, his voice lower than before, missing its usual arrogance. The farmer paused, glancing over his shoulder. Overseas? The biker nodded, suddenly unsure if he even wanted the answer. The farmer sighed, setting down his gloves and brushing dust from his hands. Served in a unit responsible for some of the toughest missions, he said, his tone even. The kind most people never hear about. Some of us made it back. Some didn't. The biker swallowed. And you led them? The farmer nodded. Yeah. A strange weight settled in the biker's chest. He had always imagined war heroes as men in crisp uniforms, their medals shining under bright lights and ceremonies. But this man dressed in dusty overalls, his hands hardened from years of farm work, was nothing like that. And yet, somehow, he was more real than any of those images. You ever regret it? The biker found himself asking. The farmer was quiet for a long moment, his gaze distant. "Regret's a tricky thing," he finally said. "I don't regret serving. I don't regret leading my men. But I regret the ones I couldn't bring home." His voice dropped slightly. "That never leaves you." The biker shifted, his stomach twisting at the thought. He had never truly lost anyone, at least not in the way this man had. His version of hardship had always been temporary, an inconvenience at worst. But this was different. He let out a breath, running a hand through his hair. "And after all, that you just decided to be a farmer?" The farmer gave a small, knowing smile. "Not just a farmer," he said. "A husband. A father. A man who found peace after war." The biker frowned, trying to process it. But, don't you miss it?" The action, the intensity. The farmer studied him for a moment before shaking his head. "You don't understand war, son. It's not what you think it is. It's not some adventure. It takes from you. And the ones who make it back spend the rest of their lives trying to fill the space it leaves behind." The words hit harder than the biker expected. He'd spent his whole life chasing excitement, believing that real living meant never slowing down. But here was a man who had seen more than he ever would, who had walked through fire and survived, and all he wanted was peace. The realization settled in his chest like a stone. For the first time, he wasn't sure if the life he had always dreamed of was really what he wanted. The wind picked up slightly, carrying the scent of fresh earth. The farmer bent down to pick up another bale of hay, moving with the ease of someone who had long since found his place in the world. The biker watched him, feeling a strange sense of respect growing in his chest. After a long silence, he took a deep breath. "I was wrong about you," he admitted. The farmer didn't look up, just nodded. "I know." The biker huffed a quiet laugh, shaking his head. "You could have rubbed it in more." The farmer smirked slightly. "Not my style." The biker glanced down at his motorcycle, the machine that had always been his escape. For the first time, it felt less like freedom and more like running. He hesitated, then looked back at the farmer. "You need a hand with that?" The farmer finally met his gaze, something unreadable passing between them. And then, after a moment, he nodded. "Yeah, I do." The biker swung his leg off the motorcycle, stepping onto the dirt with a newfound sense of purpose. For the first time in a long time, he wasn't in a hurry to leave. And as he followed the farmer toward the truck, the weight that had been sitting in his chest felt just a little bit lighter.